Right by Them, a Magnus Archives podfic, written by Esperosis and read by Ibis Podfics. Chapter 6. Alone. A content warning for this chapter is panic attacks. John rubbed his temples as he resisted the urge to sigh, yawn, or both. It had been a couple of weeks since he had started reading the statements, and he was really starting to feel the effects. From what he could tell, as of the moment, he was still completely human, so reading a statement was exhausting rather than filling. It was a problem he had run into the first time around, and it was so much worse this time. Maybe doubling his pace from last time was a bad idea, but it wasn't worse than any of the other frankly ridiculous amount of stupid ideas he'd had over the years. Surely, it made him constantly feel like death warmed over, but if he wanted to stop Elias and the web, he needed to develop his own abilities as soon as possible. Of course, it would be a lot easier to stop either of them if he had any idea of whatever the hell he was doing. The web was going to be basically impossible to stop. Even when he was basically an eldritch demigod and the most powerful being on Earth, he fell right into their hands. He had no hope of even trying to stop them as he was now, so he would unfortunately have to ignore Annabelle and her schemes for now. He knew that what they ultimately wanted, and that was going to have to be good enough. As for Elias, John had no idea what to do with that bastard. He couldn't kill him, because then everyone else would die, and he certainly wouldn't be able to convince him not to try to end the world. So if killing him and making nice weren't options, the only things he had left were figuring out how to break the stupid debt contract Elias had holding everyone hostage, or figure out some way of trapping Elias without him actually dying. The coffin came to mind immediately, but that thing wasn't delivered to the Institute until nearly a year after the unknowing, and by that point, Elias was in prison. Even if Elias wasn't in jail this time, he seriously doubted he was going to willingly walk into the buried. Trying to force him would likely not work either. John wasn't exactly the most athletic of people, and anyone he asked to help would get traumatized by Elias. So, John sighed. Overall, he was up against two people he had no idea how to deal with, and who were considerably stronger than himself in almost every conceivable way. It was frankly depressing. These weren't the worst odds he had ever had to deal with. John dragged his hands down his face as he leaned back into his chair. There were also the much more immediate issues of Tim and Sasha's quickly approaching deaths. Those needed to be avoided at all costs. Luckily, dealing with Sasha's demise was rather easy. Just don't let her go into artifact storage alone until the table had been dealt with. How was he going to deal with the table? He had no fucking idea. Sasha went to hide in the artifact storage during Prentice's siege, so he would just need to make sure she wouldn't hide in there during the siege. Thinking back, John is certain that the reason she went to artifact storage was because she left document storage to save Tim from Prentice. So, all he needed to do was make sure that the three of them were safe in document storage before the siege began. Easy! John wanted to smash his head into his desk. When had things ever gone his way? He was certain that the web would find some way to screw this up. It was their influence that started the siege early in the first place. Whatever, he'd figure out some way to outmaneuver them when the time came. He didn't care what they threw at him. They weren't taking his friends away from him again. Speaking of Tim, almost as if thinking about him alerted the man somehow, John could hear Tim's voice start to fill the archives. Martin and Sasha had gone to check on some information and to verify a few things from the library, leaving Tim behind to sort through more documents. However, John picked up another voice, a woman, vaguely familiar in a way John couldn't place. He stood up from behind his desk and walked to his open doorway, sticking his head out to see who Tim was talking to, his entire body freezing at the sight. Naomi Hearn. She was almost quiet in their shared dreams, curled up in her empty grave, sobbing as she shied away from his invasion. She was alone, so terribly alone that even the interloper with far too many eyes only highlighted her own loneliness. She had screamed at him in the beginning, demanded to know why he was always just staring at her. He couldn't reply, and she wept tears not meant to be witnessed but were drunk and enjoyed all the same. She had been the first, but not the last. Oh no, never the last. John suddenly felt the visceral need to look away from her. She didn't deserve to be watched by him anymore. She deserved her privacy away from his gaze, where she could cry tears in peaceful solitude. She deserved to move on from the Lucases, from him. John felt himself begin to tremble as he wrenched his gaze away from her, keeping his eyes locked squarely on Tim. It was a luxury neither he nor Naomi had been allowed before. "So, you're here to give a statement?" Tim asked. "Yes," Naomi replied. "So, who do I see about that?" Ah, Tim's head turned and his eyes locked on John's. John felt himself shudder as he stared at Tim. He felt disgusting, like he was invading some sort of privacy of Tim's, even though it was far too early for anything like that. No, he had more than enough time to ruin Tim's trust and sanity later, to drive his best friend away with how much of a revolting monster he was. Hey, boss man. Tim smiled at him in a way John had never deserved. This is Naomi Herm, and she's here to make a statement. What do you want to do about it? We've never really talked about the statement procedures before. You haven't? Naomi's brow furrowed. I thought you all took live statements for, well, ever, basically. We have. Tim turned back to her. Well, the Institute has. We're all new. New head archivist, new assistant, he pointed to himself. Right. Naomi frowned. John swallowed his panic and bile rose in his ground. Tim, why don't you take Miss Hearn's statement? You can use my office if that's better. Tim frowned at him as his eyes narrowed slightly, and John felt like he was being ripped out, every tiny corner of him examined and found wanting. Sure thing, boss man, he grinned. Anything else? John sputtered. Digital, if it's not recording digitally, try the tape recorder. It's on my desk. Sounds good. Tim turned to look back at Naomi. Follow me, Miss Hearn. John awkwardly shuffled out of his doorway. He didn't know what to do, where to go, or what he was even thinking at this point, aside from the fact that he couldn't look at Naomi for another moment. He could feel her gaze boring into the back of his neck as he awkwardly sat at Tim's desk. She didn't say anything. She never did. Well, at least she wasn't crying. John stared down at his hands, back ramrod straight until he heard the door click shut behind him, then for a few more seconds after that. Then he all but collapsed as he ran trembling fingers through his hair, messing up his glasses. His breath was shaky and much too fast, and his entire body was trembling like a leaf. He didn't know why this was happening. He should be fine. Why was he freaking out like this? He wasn't even the one traumatized by those monsters. They were awful, endless, horrific, and frightening. But it wasn't like he was the one being tormented. He was the tormentor, the abhorrent specter, the deformed creature forcing them to relive their worst moments. He didn't get to react like this. He didn't deserve it. Maybe he was just tired. The statements were taking a lot out of him. That's it. He was tired. It was just his exhaustion catching up with him. She had a statement, and taking it would have exhausted him more. So his body was reacting automatically. That must be it. He really didn't want to sleep right then, or ever again, really. He still remembered in the distant past how he would try avoiding sleeping for days on end before Daisy would nearly growl at him to sleep. He always tried to explain he would take it. He could last a little longer. He could give his victims another night of peaceful rest. She, of course, would just shake her head and force him into the cot. It was nice, grounding when he was listless and untethered. He missed her as much as he dreaded her eventual return, because the next time he saw her, she wouldn't be her. John held his hand aloft in front of him, and sighed as it continued to tremble. He should slow down with the statements. This exhaustion was getting detrimental to his work. He'd need to at least make sure he was well enough to take live statements. Yes, live statements. Those things he would need to take to not arouse Elias's suspicions as well as grow stronger in his own right. He would need to take statements from the statement givers that came in. A wave of nausea nearly overtook him, and he doubled over, clutching at his stomach as he thought, wow, this exhaustion was really getting to him, wasn't it? Who was he kidding? The thought of taking statements from his victims all over again made him want to rip his tongue out of his mouth. At least last time, he had the barest excuse of not knowing what he was doing to them. Now he knew. Now he knew exactly what he was doing. Would he be able to do it? Ha! Would he? Funny. He was trying to act like he had a choice in this. No, the question wasn't if he was going to take live statements. The question was how he was going to cope with doing so. John desperately tried to catch his breath. In for 5, hold for 7, out for 8. Over and over again until the tears retreated. He didn't feel like he was going to vomit anymore. Until the shaking didn't threaten to send him sprawling to the floor, and the world stopped spinning until he felt like he was firmly settled into his own skin again. He sat up and leaned backward into Tim's chair, letting his eyes flutter closed for just a moment. He just needed a moment of himself to come down from, whatever that was. The door behind him clicked open. He flinched. Thank you so much for your time, Miss Hearn. Tim's voice filled the archives and John's mind, calming some of the jittering wires in his brain. Thank you for listening. I actually feel a bit better, Naomi replied, and John refused to turn around and look at either of them. I'm glad. Would you like me to show you out? Tim asked, and John could hear him smile, his very real, very present smile, the easy one that hadn't yet been stolen from him by John and the rest of the monsters in Tim's life. I'm all right, Naomi declined. Have a nice day, Tim. You too. Tim bid her goodbye as John stood from Tim's chair with trembling knees. The two men stood silently as Naomi left, listening for the door at the top of the stairs. The moment they heard it click closed, John sighed and Tim turned back to him. Are you okay? Tim's face was creased in concern as he looked John over. You look like you're in bad shape, boss. I'm just... John trailed off, swallowed, and resumed speaking. I'm feeling a bit tired is all. Tim's frown deepened. You look tired. Want to sleep in the break room? I promise not to tell double boss. No, Thank you for the offer, but I think I'm just going to go back to my office. John gave a tight smile as he gingerly walked past Tim and just inside his office. You sure? Yes. John nodded himself. Quite. All right, Tim hesitated. If you need anything, like anything at all, let us know, okay? We're here for you, buddy. John smiled at Tim, warmth spreading against the inside of his chest. Thank you. And don't work too hard. Yes, I know, John sighed as he shook his head, very gently closing the door. He didn't like closing his door, but he just needed a moment to himself. He just needed to get himself back under control so he could keep going, keep working, keep fighting. For Tim and Sasha and Martin and all the rest of them, he had to keep going. He all but collapsed into his office chair as he let out a breath he didn't even know he was holding. He sank into the cushions and let himself breathe for a moment, just a single moment, before he noticed the notification on his computer. An email. To Jonathan Sims, from Elias Bouchard. Subject, live statement. Greetings, Jonathan. I see on the agenda today you have your first live statement giver coming down to the archives. Not only that, but it seems the young woman is one Miss Hearn, who has ties to the Lucas family, who, as you know, is one of the Institute's main benefactors. I'm certain you'll treat her with respect and take her statement very seriously, as you have demonstrated you are quite dedicated to your job. A very admirable trait. I'll admit I'm quite interested to hear how things go, since this is not only the first statement giver to arrive in your tenure as head archivist, but such an important woman at that. It's in the best interest of the Institute that such matters are taken quite seriously by you, the head archivist, but I'm certain you already know that. Do tell me how things go. Sincerely, Elias Bouchard. John bit his lip and hid his face in his hands. His elbows rested on his knees as he desperately tried to hold back the sobs threatening to burst out of him. He couldn't deal with this. He couldn't deal with him right now, but he had to. He had to, or it would be strange. John desperately wanted to cry, but instead he bit back his tears and wrote an email instead. Hello, Elias. I assure you Miss Hearn was treated quite well. I had Tim take her statement due to his people skills being vastly better than my own. Miss Hearn reported that she felt better after giving her statement, and Tim managed to record it on tape. I plan to listen to it later, as well as send the stones she provided to artifact storage. This seems like a good system. Thank you, Jonathan Sims. It was a piss-poor email, but John couldn't find it in himself to give a half-damn as he pressed send and nearly slammed his head against his desk as he slumped against it. His head lay flat against the hardwood, his arms dangling down, and the rest of his body sat on the edge of the seat. It was uncomfortable, but he refused to move. He sat there and breathed, his pulse pounding in his ears as he could practically see Elias's eyes on him. Of course, he couldn't actually tell if the bastard was looking at him, but it was more likely than not that he was watching John's pathetic display. The sound of a notification solidified John's suspicion as he turned his head to the side, facing his laptop. Another email. From Elias. Yay. Please come up to my office at your earliest convenience. Elias Bouchard. Fuck. Are you feeling all right, John? Elias asked, the perfect image of fall concern. Really, it was nearly perfect. If John hadn't known what an evil, manipulative bastard Elias was, he would have thought he was actually genuinely worried for John's health. I'm all right. I'm just a bit tired, John gave a tight-lipped smile. You look more than a bit tired. I see the bags in your eyes from across the room. John flinched. Right. Well, I'm quite all right, I assure you. Elias hummed and frowned, his gaze considering. I just asked because it's not like you to pass important work to your assistant. It's one of the reasons I wanted you as my head archivist. It won't happen again. John looked down and he felt this toxic slew of emotions threaten to overtake him again. He grit his teeth and refused to falter. John, maybe you should just sit down, Elias, his brow furrowed as he continued to pretend to be concerned. John pried his jaws open for a moment, just so he could latch onto the flesh on the inside of his cheek, coppery blood oozing into his mouth. I'm all right. John, I am genuinely concerned you are going to fall over. Please, for the love of God, take a seat. Elias cut him off. John's gaze flicked up to Elias's, and he nearly did fall on the floor when he saw the look in Elias's eyes. He was actually legitimately concerned. John sat down. Why the hell was Elias actually worried for John's health? John, Elias sighed. I know I've praised your work ethic and diligence, so perhaps it is my old fault. But I feel the need to clarify that while I greatly appreciate the speed at which you get things done, there's a limit to that too. At some point, when you work too hard, you can negatively impact your health, Elias continued. And if that were to happen, that would impact your work even greater than if you had simply not worked as quickly in the first place. What I'm meaning to say is, you need to take care of your health, John. Your physical well-being and being as healthy as you can be is very important for your job. That's what it was. Elias was worried because if John was collapsing and ill, unable to take Elias' statements, Elias's plan would be dead in the water. He needs John healthy enough to torture. John swallowed the rising bile as his body began to tremble once again. I understand. I'm giving you the rest of the day off. Elias gave him an encouraging smile. Try to relax and recuperate. Right. John? Yes? I realize that your people skills aren't well. Elias gave him a sympathetic look, and John resisted the urge to curl up into a ball. What I mean to say is, I would like you to take live statements from now on. People skills are not. It's important for the Institute's image. The head archivist fobbing statements off to his assistants might make the statement giver feel like we don't value them or their experiences. Understand? Yes, I understand, John stared at his feet. And I don't mean to make you feel like you're in trouble, Elias added. Frankly, it was my fault for not being clearer in the first place. That was one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this in person. Things can get lost in text-based communication sometimes, I feel. Of course, John nodded. Good. Elias sat back in his chair, pleased. Now, go get some rest. Somehow, it felt a lot less comforting when Elias said that than when Tim did.